am really excited to welcome to the stage Rachel Ousley from Canva. Rachel has an amazing talk for you guys about how to bring content into the fold and make our insights really easy for our stakeholders to fully internalize and wrap their head around. So she has just a great set of talks, a great talk on this topic. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, hi everyone. While people get back to their seat, I'd love to do a quick show of hands. How many of you have sat through a research readout, slides, methodology, the works, and walked away thinking, that's great, but what can I actually do with that? Okay, yeah, me too. And sometimes I'm the person who actually did the research in the first place. So here's the thing. Research is getting better. The tools are better. The methods are better. AI is supercharging our ability to synthesize data at scale. Insight quality is going up, but insight impact isn't keeping pace. And that gap between knowing and doing is the key problem that I want to dig into today. Because I think the bottleneck was never the analysis. The bottleneck is the last mile, getting insight into the heads and hands of the people who need to act on it. And that last mile is a content problem. Research doesn't drive decisions, content does. So today, I want to give you a framework that you'll hopefully find helpful. It includes 4 things that separate research that drives action from research that gets filed away. And for each one, I'll tell you what it is, what the failure mode looks like, the craft move to fix it, and sometimes how AI can actually help you do it faster. So let's get into it. Research teams, and I very much include myself in this, tend to believe that rigor guarantees impact. That if the methodology is sound and the sample size is right and the confidence intervals are tight, the work will land. But here's what I think we almost never optimize for: attention, comprehension, memorability, actionability. And these aren't soft, fluffy, nice-to-haves. These are the success criteria. The entire point of research is to inform better decisions. And if it's not doing that, then what are we actually measuring? So if we think about who's on the receiving end of our research for a second, they're time poor, they're context switching constantly, they're drowning in dashboards and AI summaries and back-to-back meetings. And your research is competing in that environment, not just against bad research, but against opinions, anecdotes, gut feel, and my personal favorite, the person who just got back from a customer visit and has a very strong take. Giving stakeholders just the findings is interesting, sure, but interesting isn't usable. It falls flat. It gets stored away. It gets forgotten about. So we have to go one step further. And that step, in my mind, is content design. And it's a craft, one that many of us were probably never taught because research training focuses almost entirely on the front end, how to collect and analyze data, and almost never on the back end, how to make it land. Content is the UX of insight, and great technology with bad UX still fails. So what does good insight content actually look like? I want to share my framework with you. It's not just a list of tips, but a way of thinking that you can apply every single time you sit down to design a piece of research content. I call it BCRA, 4 dimensions, 4 things to ask yourself before anything goes out the door. So B, the brief. What is this research actually for? C, clarity. Can anyone understand this immediately without effort? R, relevance. Does it speak directly to this audience's world? And A, actionability. Does it give them somewhere to go? For each one, as I mentioned, I'm going to start with the human bias that we're up against, because understanding why our brains make this hard is what's going to make the fix stick. Then we'll look at what the failure mode actually looks like in practice and the craft move to fix it. So the brief is dimension 0. It's the thing that has to exist before the other 3 can work. It's asking, what is this research actually for? What's the business moment it's responding to? Why are we doing this now? Is it the backbone of a campaign? Is it informing a fundamental shift in how we message to our particular audience? Is it the evidence base for a strategic bet that someone needs to make? And if you don't know the answer to those questions, you can't design content that lands, because you won't know what landing even looks like. And the bias that we're up against here is called the curse of knowledge, which is that once you know something, you can't imagine ever not knowing it. And so at the brief stage, this means you might assume the stakeholder knows exactly what they need, and the stakeholder might assume that you know exactly what they mean. But in my experience, often neither is true. So many researchers might be inclined to treat the brief as admin. It arrives, you read it, you go and you do the research, job done. But here's the problem. Briefs are often written before the stakeholder has fully thought through what they actually need. So here's what that looks like in practice. We want to understand how users are feeling about the onboarding experience and identify areas for improvement. Sounds reasonable enough, but if we read it again, what decision does this actually inform? What would we do differently based on what we find? It's completely unclear. The brief will get you a perfectly competent research report that might very well sit in a folder and drive little to no impact. So, interrogate the brief, but gently. This isn't about criticizing the stakeholder who wrote it. It's about asking the question that makes the research matter. What decision will this research inform? So not what do you want to know, but what will you do differently depending on what we find? So here's the same brief after we've interrogated it. We're deciding whether to invest in a full onboarding redesign in Q3. We need to understand where users are dropping off and why, so we can make the case to leadership. Same topic, completely different North Star. And now I know exactly what I'm building toward. So AI is a really easy way to stress test the brief. Ask it, what decision does this research need to inform? What's ambiguous or missing? And this can give you a really solid starting point in your interrogation before you've spent a week going in the wrong direction. And a little tip that I've actually just implemented is downloading skills from GitHub. So for my area of work, I downloaded the market research skill MD, and I uploaded it into Claude Cowork. So it essentially acts as an extension of my team being just me, team of one. So it's great. OK, so now let's talk about clarity. Clarity is about asking if someone with zero research experience picked this up, would they understand it immediately? Or would they have to read it multiple times, triangulate between slides, and piece together what it's actually saying? If it's the latter, we've already lost them. Not because they're not smart enough, but because we've made them do work that we could have done for them. And we're up against 3 different biases here. The curse of knowledge again, because familiarity kills your sense of what's surprising. You spent weeks with the data, so the finding that might have seemed shocking on day 1, week 1, feels really obvious to you now, and you may inadvertently bury it. 2 is cognitive load. So as we know, overloaded brains tend to default to shortcuts. So dense and jargon-heavy content doesn't get engaged with deeply, and instead it gets filed under, I'll read this later. And lastly, fluency heuristic. Clarity signals credibility. If content is hard to process, people don't just disengage, they actually trust it less. So ease of reading is definitely not just a cosmetic concern. So with those biases in mind, 2 things kill clarity in research content. The first is obvious, that jargon, methodology-heavy framing, way too many caveats. But the second is sneakier, and I think it's actually much more damaging. And it's that we may, as I mentioned, breeze past the most exciting findings because we've lived and breathed with them for weeks, and they no longer feel surprising or maybe even interesting to us. So here's what a clarity failure looks like. Study findings indicate that 34% of respondents reported experiencing difficulty navigating the checkout flow with statistically significant variation across device type. It's accurate. It's also pretty useless to a product manager who maybe has 30 seconds and just needs to know what to do. So read your content back as if you know nothing. Ask yourself, what would be surprising to a completely fresh set of eyes? Because surprising is what makes people pay attention. So lead with that, not with the methodology. So here's that same finding with clarity applied. 1 in 3 customers gets lost at checkout, and it's twice as bad on mobile. It's the same data, but your reader can now do something with that. Relevance. Relevance is about specificity, not just, is this interesting, but is this interesting to this person in this role dealing with this challenge right now? So the question to ask yourself, will my audience feel like this was made for them? Or will they have to do the mental work to figure out what it means for them personally? Because the truth is, in my experience, Most stakeholders, will not do that mental work. If the connection to their world isn't obvious, they'll file it under, yeah, this is interesting, but maybe not for me, and they'll just move on. So the bias that we're up against here is availability bias. What feels personally relevant is easier to recall, and what's easier to recall feels more important. Content that speaks directly to someone's world doesn't just land better, it stays. The failure mode here looks like generic findings, research that could apply to any team, any product, any context. It's technically accurate and professionally presented and forgettable. So here's what that looks like. You send the same 40-slide report to the product team, the marketing team, and the exec. Everyone gets everything. The product team skims for UX findings, marketing skims for messaging angles, the exec reads the summary and moves on. Everyone got something, but nobody got what they actually needed. So know your audience before you design the content, not after. So what relevance looks like in practice is for the product team, maybe it's behavioral patterns, specific drop-off points, and friction in the experience, the things that they can act on in their next sprint. For marketing, maybe it's how customers describe their own problems in their own words, ready to be turned into messaging. And for the exec, it's the strategic implication and the recommended decision. One page, no methodology. So it's the same research, 3 different outputs, and absolutely that used to mean triple the work for us, which is exactly why I think a lot of us couldn't or couldn't do it. So this is the particular AI use case that I am most jazzed about. Because you can take one piece of research that you, the researcher, have created and ask AI to reformat it for those different stakeholder audiences. So it might not be perfect, but it can get you sort of 80% of the way there in minutes rather than days or weeks like it would have in the past. So this is really relevance at scale. So just a personal example is recently I created an in-depth report on one of my priority audiences. It was a very meaty 30-slide Canva deck built for my product marketing team, and it had the level of depth that they really needed in order to update our messaging accordingly. I then used Claude to turn it into an interactive artifact and ultimately a Canva website for my time-poor stakeholders who just need the answer. They just need the so what. And then I also used Notebook LM to turn it into a video summary because I have some senior stakeholders who much prefer visual outputs. So it's just one example of how AI has really been helping me to scale my work. All right, actionability. Actionability is the difference between insight that informs and insight that moves. It's asking, does this give the stakeholders somewhere to go? And I mean both kinds of somewhere. Tactical, what can we do right now, this sprint, this quarter? And strategic, what does this mean for the bigger picture and the long-term direction? Both matter, because tactical without strategic feels reactive, and strategic without tactical feels abstract. So the magic really is in having both. And the biases that we're up against here are loss aversion. So people respond more strongly to potential losses than equivalent gains. So insights framed as risks actually outperform those framed as opportunities. So instead of we could grow revenue by 10%, we say we are leaving 10% revenue on the table. And then choice architecture. If you leave the path forward open-ended, decision fatigue kicks in, and maybe nothing happens. So can we design the next step into the content itself and make it really obvious and not optional? So insight without implication creates paralysis. I'm sure you've seen this. I have many times. Someone reads a great piece of research, they nod along, and then they ask, so what do we do about it? And if they're asking that question, then the content itself hasn't done the job. So here's what that looks like. Customers report confusion during the onboarding flow. End of slide. I think sometimes we as researchers might resist making recommendations because maybe it feels like it's overstepping or we are moving outside of our lane. But I actually think there's an opportunity for a reframe, which is recommendations aren't overstepping. They're the whole point. And we're the ones who did the research. We know the data better than anyone else in the room. And if we don't connect it to action, then who will? So every insight should have a so what and a now what. The so what connects the finding to why it matters. The now what makes the path forward explicit. So here's that same finding with actionability built in. Confusion in onboarding is causing an estimated 20% drop-off in the first week. That's 1 in 5 customers lost before they've ever seen the product's core value. And then here are 2 recommendations, which include both tactical and strategic, to provide to your stakeholders. They might not do these exact things, but these could serve as great thought starters for the next steps that they actually do take to action on that insight. So now there's a so what and a now what. Now someone can do something. OK, so my favorite slide. We've been through all 4 dimensions. And I want to show you what that looks like when they all fire at once, because I think the difference is pretty dramatic. So what failure looks like. A 40-slide deck lands in someone's inbox. The brief was never interrogated, so the research answers a question that maybe nobody was actually trying to ask. The findings are buried in methodology. There's no acknowledgement of which team this is for or what they do. And it ends with the data. No implications, no recommendations, just data. It gets a reply that says, really interesting, thanks, and then nothing. So what excellence looks like. The same research, redesigned. It opens with the business question it's answering and why it matters right now. The key finding is on slide 1 in plain English, and there are 3 versions. One for example, one for the exec, one for the product team, and one for marketing. And it ends with a clear recommendation and a recommended action, framed as a risk. Here's what we're leaving on the table if we don't act on this. It's the same research, and it's a completely different fate in the organization. And that's what BCRA unlocks. So here's where I want to leave you. The BCRA framework is practical. You can apply it tomorrow. But it's also pointing at something bigger. The most effective insight professionals of the next decade won't just be brilliant analysts. They'll be what I'd like to call insight architects, people who can do 3 things: discover truth through rigorous research, shape meaning through behavioral science and smart framing, and drive action through content design that closes the gap between knowing and doing. And that's definitely not a smaller job than the one we have now. It's bigger, and I would argue it's actually more important. Half our job is the research, but the other half is evangelizing, communicating, bringing people along. And in my opinion, content is not the final step in the research process. It is the research process, or at least it's inseparable from it. If insight doesn't drive action and decision, the research didn't work, no matter how airtight the methodology was. If we own the insight, we also own how it lands. In a world where everyone has access to data, where AI can synthesize 1,000 data points in seconds, the advantage doesn't go to the team with the best analysis. It goes to the team that can turn insight into action. So, interrogate the brief ruthlessly. Design for clarity like someone's attention depends on it, because it does. Make it feel like it was built for the person that was reading it, and never ever deliver a finding without telling people what they can do about it. That's the craft, that's the job, and I think that's what separates truly stellar researchers. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Rachel. That was such a great talk. I feel like I want that message like injected straight into my veins. I say this to my team all the time, like if you could do the best research you've ever done in your entire career, but it doesn't land, it's actually not the best research. It's probably one of the worst, because it's like producing a research deliverable that doesn't have impact is like a tree falling in the woods with nobody to see it, right? You have to have a report that is truly internalized by your stakeholders and has that impact, like just like you said. And yeah, like that whole message really, really resonated with me personally. So I love it. All right, with that, I will open it up to the audience. Any questions for Rachel on her talk? If not, I can jump in because I have a couple. Also, while you guys think about your questions you want to ask, one question for you, Rachel, for me is going back to AI. So you talked about how you're a team of 1 and you have a lot of ground to cover, and AI can help improve your productivity. But we also, like the flip side of AI is that can produce AI slop. And thinking about content, how you talked about how AI can help you kind of take your research artifact and make it a little bit more tailored to some of the different audiences, which I love that use case. But how do you do that without avoiding the curse of AI slop? Because you don't want to, hey, exec, here's a 1-pager summary of my research, but it just kind of looks like anything else you might see from AI. How do you avoid that?
For sure. So when I was talking about the particular example of changing content into multiple different formats, I made very clear to emphasize that this is the work that you, the researcher, did yourself. I think that's the first thing. I know we hear a lot about human in the loop, but I actually think it's more about like human at the helm, because I think like ultimately these should be our ideas. And like I've said, we're the ones who are closest to it. We know it better than anyone, and that includes AI. AI is fantastic and smart and brilliant and all these great things, but it doesn't have the same context and connection to the work that we do ourselves. So I think the most important thing is like, I think a lot of people talk about, do you use AI as a first step or a last step? I'm definitely in the camp of using it more as a last step, to refine and sort of scale rather than create or start from scratch. So that's just one note. But I think other ways that I'm using it, I mean, my co-work is kind of out of control at this point with how many different things I've connected, different skills I've embedded. If I have worked on multi-part survey, I'll create it as a custom project that multiple parts of my team can access, which I think is also a scary thing because you're essentially democratizing the access to your data, whereas I think historically, people would have to come to you for it. But I actually haven't found that this makes people come to me less. I've found like it has people come to me more, but with smarter questions. So I'm not just like going through the data and pulling a data point out for them because they can do that themselves. They're then coming to me and being like, okay, this is super interesting. I found this one data point. Like, can you help me understand what it means and help contextualize it? So I think that's a good way of kind of making sure that you're still very much involved in the process.
Yeah, human at the helm. I love that framing. I'm going to take that one with me for sure. And we actually did at Slack, we did a similar research project of like, how does AI use affect human-to-human collaboration? And what we found is it doesn't, if you're using AI, you don't talk to humans less. You talk to them actually about the same, but with kind of more engaging questions, because like there's kind of like one-off short questions you just go to AI for, and then you're talking to humans for kind of the more engaging stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. I also big fan of using it to soften certain things that I'm saying. I've been told I'm really direct and blunt in written form, and so I use AI all the time. I'm like, can I just bounce this off of you and tell me how you, as a stranger, might perceive this? So that's also helped me in my human communication.
Yeah, it's a good sounding board for sure. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, we got one here in the corner.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. My question is more about how do you prioritize which audience you need to build for first? I have a lot of different stakeholders. Engineering is sometimes involved. And most of the research that I need to present is presented to all of them at the same time, so they all need their so what and now what. How would you go about prioritizing for such different audiences, and especially when they seem to respond to information in very different ways?
Yep, absolutely. And I am definitely in your same boat with a myriad of different stakeholders and audiences. I go back to that first step of interrogating the brief. So really trying to understand like what is the business going to do differently. And I think oftentimes what we actually might find is that the business is exploring potentially creating a new product offering or a new feature or something like that. So marketing, there shouldn't be involved at that stage. I mean, it might be interesting to them, but the takeaways I'm really going to root are directed at that product audience. So I recently did, potential vertical expansion project, and ultimately our go-to-market team, our marketing team, they can't really action on it if the product isn't there yet. And so even though the ask actually originated from marketing, my recommendations were for product. So I did get everybody in a room together, and I was like, first, I literally mapped it out. It was like a stoplight. I was like, here's what needs to happen first. Once product, if this is the path that we choose to go down, once product does its thing, then marketing can come in, and then go to market and sales and so on. So yeah, I just go back to really at that first stage of interrogating the brief, and like I said, I've absolutely pivoted and be like, yeah, I know I got this request from this particular team, but actually I think it's maybe even more valuable for this other team at this moment in time.
Awesome. Well, I think that is all the time we have with Rachel today. Please join me in thanking her for this amazing talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.